Just got my little sign saying this meeting's being recorded, so we're all good. Talia, you have anything you want to add before we get to Claire?
No, I just want to welcome everyone, thank them for coming this morning. I think this is an incredibly important topic that many of us have been discussing, and they have a lot of information to provide and will be excellent at answering some of your questions. And since they're a neighboring city, I also think it's relevant just because they have been through this process. I just want to mention that we will have our first mixer in person June 17th at Wildhaven, our glamping spot. It is limited capacity, so please register online. And this year we're bringing back our annual business awards and barbecue, and it looks like the date will be August 26th. So we'll send everybody information about that. But Mark, let's go ahead and get started with the program and welcome everyone this morning.
Yeah, well, you know what? A little bit of your presentation cut out on me. I don't know if it's everybody's getting that, but I didn't get the location or date of the event, or I couldn't hear it.
We'll put it in the chat. Okay,
awesome. All right, well, welcome everybody. And I want to give a special welcome to Clare Hartman, the Interim Assistant City Manager over in the City of Santa Rosa. Claire, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting us. I'd like to introduce myself and then also Andrew, just so you know who's presenting today. And also get a check on, will you be sharing your screen for our presentation, or do we share ours?
I can share my screen. I have it available here.
Okay, great. All right, well, my name's Clare Hartman. I've been with the City of Santa Rosa for just about 22 years, all with the planning division. And my introduction to cannabis policy came in 2016 while I was Deputy Director for Planning. And it's been, I think in the last 7 months, I've been serving as Interim Assistant City Manager. And Andrew, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Triple. I'm the Acting Supervising Planner for Development Services Current Planning. I've worked alongside Claire with the cannabis program, really on application review, coordination with prospective applicants as well as current applicants. And currently I serve as the point of contact for the state, processing verifications or requests for verification of local authorization, as well as then managing the planning team who continues to provide application review for land use entitlements for the entirety of the cannabis program, ranging from cultivation, manufacturing, to distribution and retail uses. So it's great to be here today and to talk with you about our program and hopefully share some of our insights and lessons learned with you.
Great. You get the slides. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. So as Andrew mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about Santa Rosa's strategy around our cannabis program, our lived experience that you will have benefit of. We didn't. We were experiencing it live while we were going through it, and then the lessons learned that have come out of that. Next slide. So we'll start with the Santa Rosa's philosophy about how we approach the topic. As many of you know, in 2016, it was kind of a game changer with state laws, opening up the market, if you will, for medical cannabis, and put the policy down statewide and basically said jurisdictions, you either need to act locally or the state rules will apply, which were permissive for medical cannabis. So while most jurisdictions quickly were adopting urgency ordinances prohibiting cannabis, Santa Rosa took a different approach. Our city council collectively established some key principles. One, just recognizing this wasn't an industry that was new. It was just underground. In fact, it was acknowledged that many among us in Sonoma County and even within the city of Santa Rosa, we were aware of the industry. We were aware of people who worked for the industry or benefited from the industry. And so we treated it as it was part of our community. It wasn't coming to our community, it was part of it. And so we also wanted to treat it as a land use, not sort of prior to 2016, looking at it as, well, a police activity, if you will, that it's an enforcement case, but actually it's a land use, it's an industry. And so like any industry, it should have a permit pathway. We should be able to reconcile any operational impacts and address it through our land use process. So we wanted to normalize the industry. And I think one of the things that's really different about how Santa Rosa approached it is they didn't want to wait. So our council was anxious to sort of get the ball rolling, if you will, and they wanted us to start opening up to the business as soon as possible so that there was less room for them to be in the gray area between the illegal market and the legal market. And they knew that the ramp up to the legal market would be, it was going to take a lot of hands and a lot of flexibility. And so they wanted to just get started and start testing the approach through interim measures. And then also, I think unique in the early days with Santa Rosa was they recognized that like any industry, you know, the car industry, you wouldn't allow selling of cars without allowing the repair of cars. And so you wouldn't, you would also allow retail car parts. So just like any industry, it has multifacets within the industry, and they wanted to address as many facets of the industry as possible. So you're not excluding sort of supportive services to the grow operations or the retail operations. So they quickly came to realize, unlike many other cities, they didn't want to just focus on retail. They wanted the whole of the industry. And we are an urban city, so we felt we could accommodate most of the industry. Next slide. So there's a lot of information on this and I won't go through it, but this sort of tells our story chronologically. We also had an advantage in Santa Rosa because as early as 2005, we did allow for medical dispensaries. So the benefit of that is we had lived experience with 2 legal dispensaries for medical use in Santa Rosa. So what we learned from that is they were quite quiet industries. They were, you could drive by and there was no signage that said, you know, come here and there's marijuana here being sold. It was they were very quiet. Parking lots were quiet and very few calls for service. So we had the benefit of that lived experience, at least in terms of policymakers. Residents didn't really even know that we had these, a lot of them. So when we were coming online with our new policies, they thought we were offering this for the first time, and we had to educate that we actually had them in our community. They might even have lived down the street and they just never noticed them. So in the first year, what we embarked on was a council priority to support the industry. And that was essentially what they gave us is a directive to support it and to support it based on the principles I talked about. So we did some experimental things. We looked at what could we do in the interim. We did pass a interim ordinance that allowed indoor cultivation. And we passed an ordinance that also prohibited outdoor cultivation. Again, we're an urbanizing city, so we wanted to set sort of the ground rules up front about outdoor cultivation because that garners the most public interest is outdoor cultivation, as we've all watched our poor county partners struggle with that. But it is more of an agricultural use. So we quickly said that would be one of the very few things we wouldn't allow in the city. So we sort of drew that line in the sand. And then for the others, outside of retail, we knew that would take a longer conversation. What we did is we passed what we call a zoning code interpretation, and we allowed manufacturing, testing, and distribution on the same par as their counterparts. So a business that manufactures, you know, some other kind of widget or food product, they had a permit path. And what we did is we simply passed an interpretation that irregardless of if it was this widget or cannabis widget, it would be the same. And so that allowed us to move quickly into a permitting process for these sort of low level, low impact type of uses. And then that gave us time to draft a comprehensive cannabis ordinance. And we spent 2 years in public meetings with a council subcommittee meeting, which had three of our 7 council members. We met monthly and we engaged in many, many conversations within the subcommittee meetings, which were well attended, but also public workshops. And then I also on here, we did pass a cannabis business tax early on to sort of set the stage. And for that, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so our comprehensive ordinance really didn't come into effect until January 2018. But by then we had a couple of years of experience of conversations and also testing it through interim measures. Next slide. And I think one of the things that worked the best through all of this was how transparent we were. Because I was Deputy Director of Planning, so I had many different responsibilities at the time, one of which was to initiate a cannabis program for the city, which involved, you know, all the departments across the organization, the community council subcommittee, and the public, whether it was the industry or residents or non-commercial non-cannabis commercial businesses. They were all interested. The only thing I could do to survive this was put it all on the website. So anything I knew, I put on the website. So we built FAQs as we were riding this train, and we put helpful pages up for all these different stakeholder groups so that they could find the answers that they had. And it was the most useful tool, is to really have a dedicated, completely transparent process, because everyone can answer the questions. It didn't just come down to me. Next slide. So one of the early things that we enabled was a cannabis business tax. And our approach with this, and this has not changed. So this, what we adopted June 6th of 2017 is still in effect. We actually, there was a period where we looked into it, but we continued the existing tax. You can see that we do tax cultivation. We're only allowing indoor cultivation, and it's basically, they have a choice because we were so new to the industry. And the industry was actually quite new to this. So in negotiations with the cultivators, we came up with an either or. You could pay tax on gross receipts, or you could pay tax on square feet. We've actually had some cultivation businesses flip and flop on this because they're trying to find their way. Of course, they want to pay the less tax, so they're trying to figure out which is the less tax. And so, but they still have the choice. And then manufacturing, we kept it down very low at 1%. We wanted to tax it. We knew we'd get a lot of manufacturers, but we wanted to invite them in. So we kept the percentage down low. This is really a lot lower than a lot of other jurisdictions. I think a lot of other jurisdictions are at least at like 3%. We kept it low on purpose because, again, we wanted to do the most we could to legalize what we already considered businesses within our community that were just under the table. So we wanted to bring them in with the lowest threshold possible. And then for retail, at the time, we wanted to just watch the market and see what the market could bear. But we did tax adult use. And at the time that we passed this, we hadn't even allowed adult use, but we set this as a placeholder. Now we have adult use, which is recreational, and we set it at 3%. Next slide. So this is just a peek at our comprehensive policy. So it does address personal use, but predominantly is set up to control and regulate commercial cannabis. And as you can see here, we allow almost everything. So even manufacturing, they have something called volatile and non-volatile. And because we allow both extremes in non-cannabis businesses, the decision was made to allow it also for cannabis. So not to exclude cannabis from business models that we already have in Santa Rosa. And then the only other thing I can think of here that we don't allow is we don't allow delivery only retail. We do require a storefront. And again, early on, we made the decision that we want them out front in the community. And there is a bit of peer pressure on in the retail market. If they have to have a storefront, then you have to see the door, you have to, you're part of the community, you're not behind the corner with the retail cannabis business. So that was important to us as well. We actually, it's not on here, but we actually also allow consumption, though Andrew might get into it. There's a dog that chases its tail in our city code that kind of basically, we didn't mean for this to happen, but essentially it makes allowing consumption very difficult because there's conflicts, internal conflicts with our codes essentially to execute vaping or smoking consumption with our smoking ordinance. But you can see we allow everything else. So we have had experience processing all of these items. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of our zoning code that is just illustrating that wherever, like this is an example of where laboratories, medical or analytical, which we have several of in Santa Rosa, where they fall in the zoning code, what the permit path is, and our application of simply adding, we do regulate cannabis separately as a distinct land use, but you could see we basically match the permit path for the non-cannabis counterpart. Next slide. And then there are a few exceptions. We recognize cannabis stinks, and the odor of cannabis is not only obnoxious to many people, can actually make people sick, and also is a nuisance. And an attractive nuisance is another way to say it, because that's a security issue. If you can smell it, you can find it. That was an issue. So, but we didn't have an extensive list. We boiled it down to what is it really that's really different that we need to address specifically. And that included, excuse me, security, the odor control, lighting, and noise. And that's what we really boiled down to. So that's how we treat it different than their counterparts. With odor, we don't allow the odor to be outside of the front door. So this was another, we drew very few lines in the sand, and this was one of them. And it solved so many other issues. So we felt strongly that, and also we tested it with the industry, and they said that they could do it, that there was mechanical systems that they could do it, or they could have a lobby that sort of helps buffer that. It's particularly hard to do for manufacturers who are processing the raw product into processed products. But they said they could do it. So we said, okay, well, this is a testing market. Let's put that line in the sand and let's see if we can do it. And to date, they have been able to do it. We also don't want to, we're just a city, so we don't want to do everything. So we rely on our state partners for background checks and licenses, in addition to their local permits. And we rely on the Department of Health, and just like we do for other businesses. Next slide. Excuse me. And so the next part of our presentation focuses mostly on our retail experience, because like I said, that first year, we're really focused on non-retail stuff. The comp ordinance really broke through and allowed retail. And for that, we thought, well, that you have more interaction with the public. The other uses are not really available to the public. So we needed to really address that more specifically. And so I don't know, Andrew, if you want to take it from here, but talk about our standards that are a little bit different for retail than our other businesses, and then how our process worked for accepting applications.
Sure, thanks, Claire. I think before we move into the sort of deeper dive on retail, if we have any questions or want to explore a bit further some of the information that Claire has presented, we might want to go ahead and do that here at this sort of midpoint. So
yeah, I also want to say that we have, our Mayor Evelyn Mitchell and I think all the city council members are here as well. I know
Great.
Jimenez, Skylar's here.
Great, thank you. I did, in advance of any questions, I did have one point. When Claire talked about the cannabis subcommittee work that was done for 2 years crafting the policy, one thing that I really was excited about, I think, and I think was notable in that process, was the presence of both the community and the industry at these meetings. We had great representation by, both bodies. And I really think that they did a great job of informing the process. Certainly the industry was able to represent its needs and its wants and its concerns, but then the community was able to do that as well. So that council subcommittee policy process, I think, was really able to surface opportunities and concerns and address those in a public forum that was meaningful to everyone who participated. So I did want to point that out about that policy development process. Do we have any questions at this point, or shall I go on?
If you have questions, just go ahead and raise your hand at the bottom of the screen or type it in the chat and we can make sure we get to you. I've never seen this group quiet.
Perhaps after we finish up with the retail, because that was really the wild ride.
I think Jeff K has a question. Jeff?
I do. Thank you. For either Claire or Andrew, thank you both for the presentation. You mentioned delivery quickly as something not permitted. My experience is that's incredibly hard to, although my experience is not here in this county as much, since I'm still pretty new here, but it's incredibly hard to regulate that. And I'm curious if you've had struggles with that and if delivery is out there in ways that we just can't control.
Yes, it is out there in ways we cannot control. So one of the things we learned after we drew the line in the sand on no delivery only models is that deliveries in our neighboring communities can, like Petaluma, for example, they actually only allowed delivery only models when they started. They might have changed that, but early on, that was our neighbor and they allowed only delivery only models. Well, those retail enterprises, then they take the profit on the retail and then they deliver to Santa Rosa customers, and the state laws allowed them to cross jurisdictional boundaries for customer service. So our customer base within our city, their service was going elsewhere. So it's probably one of the things we probably take a look at if we ever went back and amended our ordinance. We haven't. We're still living with the ordinance that we adopted back in 2017. But that is one of the nuances is, like it or not, delivery service is happening in your community. So it's a question of, do you want to have that model as a base in your community or not?
Yeah. And I think it would be incredibly difficult to enforce, a ban on delivery from businesses in other jurisdictions. So I think that the likely route to look at how to regulate or how to participate in delivery coming from businesses in other jurisdictions would be, through the city's business tax code, which would require that revenues generated in the city of Santa Rosa would be subject to tax. So I think that would be an important component of looking at delivery from businesses in other jurisdictions.
And all of our retail have asked for delivery services. So that they just need to ask up front. That becomes part of their permit. So we'll get to how many dispensaries we have approved, and all of them offer delivery.
Yeah. Great. I see some comments in the chat. So thank you for that. I think if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and jump back into the slides again then, Jessica. Super. So as Claire said, in April of 2018, with the comprehensive cannabis policy in place, we really spent from January of 2018 when the ordinance was adopted to April, putting together that retail application opportunity, because we anticipated much pent-up demand, and the result of the activity was that there was a lot of pent-up demand. But Very quickly, retail is allowed in a majority of our zoning districts, excluding, of course, residential. But in our commercial and industrial zoning districts, the one exception is our downtown commercial district, where we do not allow retail activity. The industry and many property owners, business owners would like that to be changed to allow retail downtown, but the initial thought on not allowing it was because we didn't want to compete with other downtown commercial activity and potentially inhibit success of other business development downtown. So I think when at some point in the future the ordinance does come back for possible amendment or review, certainly reconsidering downtown retail would be one of those items that's on the table, but we don't have a date at present for that. Then setbacks to sensitive receptors were consistent with state law regarding 600 feet to a K through 12 school. And then rather than, many jurisdictions established a number of retail permits that they would approve. Our perspective was we had no idea what demand was for the retail land use, either demand by the industry or demand from the community for that product. Because, with this emerging industry, you really don't have any data to support decisions to be made, such as, restricting the number of permits that you would issue. So to be sensitive to the fact that there could be some demand-related issues, we did establish the overconcentration policy that prohibits a cannabis retail facility from locating within 600 feet of another cannabis retail facility. That doesn't prohibit locating within 600 feet of another cannabis land use. So that is an important distinction. And I think that overconcentration policy has been quite effective, especially as we started to see where some of the sweet spots were in the community for cannabis retail. And then finally, the permitting process, we do require a major conditional use permit that's reviewed at a public hearing before the Planning Commission. And then the appeal authority is the City Council. We do require a neighborhood meeting, but that is really a function of the fact that a public hearing is required. So in the City of Santa Rosa, we require neighborhood meetings for all projects that are subject to a public hearing requirement. Next slide, please. Ariel, in response to the question about sensitive receptors and if we consider parks to be sensitive receptors, the answer is no. The sensitive receptors are restricted to the K through 12 schools. So then the initial submittal or onslaught, the beauty contest that's described on this slide here. The process that Claire took the lead to develop was that we would begin accepting applications on April 20th of 2018. We did have a pre-application meeting that was required. They did have to have their neighborhood meetings completed, and we would talk with them about the application requirements. And then they would submit their conditional use permit application and pay the applicable fees. And in that phase one or initial submittal process, we did require that they respond to some merit criteria. And then we took a period of time of 60 days to do a completeness review of the application. And planning staff then scored or ranked those applications based upon the merit criteria. The ranking only happened for those applications that were within 600 feet of one another. So in other words, we used the merit criteria and ranking to create a tiebreaker, if you will, on those applications that would have resulted in overconcentration. And I think we had out of, was it 25 applications, Claire, that were initially submitted? I think we had 5 or 6 pods that we had to sort of break that overconcentration.
Yeah, that sounds right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this process of reviewing the competing applications within the pod, as Andrew says, it took several staff members,
Yeah.
and it took a few months to get through the ranking and the vetting through the subcommittee. So that picture there is no joke. They came in within a 2-week period. We had to treat them all equally and filter them through this essentially a beauty contest for how high they ranked based on some objective criteria. But it quickly moves out of objective criteria when you start vetting it at a council subcommittee.
Right. Yeah. So if you imagine steps 1, 2, and 3 are 3 applications within 600 feet of one another, it really does, through that subcommittee review process, if they selected, say, the step 2 application, then that would eliminate steps 1 and 3 from moving forward. So there's a little bit of a nuance there, but and we did have a couple of decisions by the subcommittee appealed to City Council. We did allow that process of appeal, and I think that was beneficial and was helpful to ensuring that the overall process was as fair as possible. I think that's really what we were striving to do, is manage demand and ensure that we had a fair process that was fully transparent to the applicants. And then in step 6, the conditional use permit process, where we then went into planning review of those applications that were moving forward, and then conducted our planning review process for compliance with the zoning code, and then took applications to public hearing before the Planning Commission. A note on step 6, we actually, within the last month, completed review of 2 of the applications that were submitted in April of 2018. So for a variety of reasons, I think in those cases, they did go to appeal before the City Council. So that was some of the time that was taken, over the 3-year period of review. Our typical review time frame now is about 6 to 8 months, which is consistent with a planning review of a major conditional use permit. Next slide, please. And so then going into 2019, or phase 2 of the acceptance of retail applications, we modified the process a bit in that we required a pre-application appointment to submit an application. And then during that process, we would check the location against other pending or approved applications on record. So and that was to address the overconcentration issue. And then when an application was not within 600 feet of another pending or approved application, then we would date timestamp it, and then that would set the new location for a pending application. So there was a bit of a shift from 2018 to 2019, as well as the fact that in 2019, then we didn't require that applicants respond to the merit criteria. So we pared down the application requirements to the essential information necessary for a major conditional use permit.
One thing I would add is, so we tried the beauty contest. It was an enormous amount of work. And then our next round, we tried the first come, first serve option. And what was interesting is while we were announcing that's where we were headed, I literally got a phone call from someone saying, is it okay if I spend the night in the city courtyard so I could be first in line? And I thought, oh gosh, here we go again, another process that's going to have its own, issues and logistics. And so that's where we ended up securing an appointment-based system, kind of like buying concert tickets. So it became the hottest concert ticket on the market because literally if you could get that 15-minute check-in appointment ahead of the next guy within 600 feet, you would get the ability to move forward in the process, and the other person would not. And so it solved some issues. It created others that we had to work with.
Yeah. I think too, as we moved from 2018 to 2019, you know, this is an evolving industry, of course. And so we started to see an evolution of the quality of applications, of the applicant representatives, and of the capitalization related to projects. So applicants started coming forward with an applicant team that consisted of, you know, their real estate land use attorney or cannabis expert, industry expert, civil engineers and such, and the application started becoming much higher quality, much more thorough. And so the process, I think, as the industry evolved and became more familiar with not just our process, but the legalization process throughout the state, we did experience the benefits of the formalization and growth within the industry itself. Next slide, please. So the results of all of this, of you know, the last 3 years of work with regard to cannabis retail applications, we do have 8 operating retail establishments. We have 22 land use entitlements for retail dispensary land uses that have been approved, and we currently have 7 under review. So I won't say for certain, but I would anticipate that the majority of those 7 that are currently under review have come in outside of the 2018 or 2019 process. So they're coming in as part of our ongoing acceptance of retail applications without restriction, other than the verification of over concentration.
And I would only add, so out of the 30 that are approved or operating, we've had maybe 4 land use appeals to the city council.
Right,
so
right.
We anticipated a lot of appeals, and that has not realized. And it's those appeals that do move forward. It's not unlike what we get with our apartment buildings or whatnot, just the fear of what's happening next door and perceived change of use.
Right, that's a great point, because I think that we've been fortunate in that a majority of the community has been accepting of the land use. But we do have the appeal process for those who have concerns about the land use related to traffic, related to consumption immediately adjacent to a retail establishment and so forth. So we're able to address those concerns through the appeal process. Next slide, please. And then here we're looking at our locations of pending, approved, and operating applications as of May 15th of this year. So you can see, if we look at the pink triangles, which don't show up really well here, there's a lot of data on this map. We do have concentrations of activity primarily in our commercial corridors, and our high volume, high traffic volume commercial corridors, I think, is where we would see a majority of the retail activity happening.
And what I wanted to illustrate with this slide is simply that it's one issue we were trying to address by being broad with our commercial districts and industrial district allowances for retail, is that it's not in one part of our city. It's all throughout our city is the opportunity. The green represents applications. The blue are the 600-foot buffers of schools.
Great. And this map is also available on our website at srcity.org/cannabis. If you want to, you can go there and blow it up and kind of look around and see where some of those concentrations of activity are happening. I think what we could say at this point, though, is that if you see a green circle, that would indicate that there is a pending or approved or operating retail establishment. And so that green circle does represent that buffer around retail land use in the city. Next slide, please. So the results and then some observations, I think, interesting points that we've had about the entirety of the process and all of our land uses. Claire, if you want to kick off this slide.
These are just sort of a summation of all the lessons learned across the organization, whether it's collecting tax and working with that, or our code enforcement. It turns out our biggest code enforcement officers are out there in the field. They're all the legal operators. Peer pressure, you have the legal operators that are going through the process. They're helping turn in those that are in the same industrial complex that aren't, because unfair business practice. So they're a good partner. We get a lot of Public Record Act requests, especially early on. That was enormous. So people need to keep in mind those kinds of things. All these are sort of indirect effects that happen when you're taking on a new process like this. But yes, all of these things are part of it. But I think now would be a good time to go into questions that you have. And we can stop sharing the screen so we can see all your faces.
Okay, great. So if anybody has a question, if you'd put your hand up, we can take a look at that and get to you. Anybody out there? Aaron? I see Aaron Gore with a hand up. Aaron, you have a question?
Hi there, yes. What would you say do you see for an innovation pipeline coming down the road? Like, for example, on-site tours, immersive experiences. I think, full transparency, I'm in the cannabis industry. I'm vertically licensed in Cloverdale. My company is called Garden Society, and I really commend Santa Rosa for a really progressive ordinance. I know there's some immersive experiential cannabis, cannabis licenses that have just been approved and are coming online in Santa Rosa. And I think it'd be really great for you guys to talk about that, especially talk about that from a tourism and tax and consumer demand point of view. Does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely. I think to peg back to one thing Claire had said about the challenges of on-site consumption within the city of Santa Rosa, because while we do allow on-site consumption, we do require that it complies with our smoking ordinance, which would prohibit smoking or vaping indoors or within 25 feet of a window or door opening to a building. And I think that likely that on-site consumption challenge is what sort of limits that more immersive experience, because I feel like for that immersive experience to be fully meaningful, it does need that consumption. And I believe the industry feels that that preferred form of consumption for the on-site consumption is smoking or vaping. So to be able to allow that would take quite a large, I think, facility in terms of parcel square footage to be able to provide that on-site consumption within compliance of our smoking ordinance. So that's one factor I think that is limiting the immersive experience. And Claire, maybe you've seen it differently from a different perspective.
Well, I mean, I think when we were first looking at consumption and how it might fit into Santa Rosa, we were obviously big supporters of the craft beer industry. We've changed a lot of our policies to be supportive of that, where you can make the product and taste the product and entertain with the product, all on the same campus. We have a lot of that going on. Same with boutique wineries. We allow tasting and events at the maker space, boutique size. With cannabis, we supported they call it micro business license, where it's the same idea of you make it, you package it, you make something of it, and you can entertain at the site. The thing is with our smoking ordinance, you're limited to just edibles, and that just hasn't taken off in the industry. So unless we reconcile the smoking ordinance, I don't know if the industry has a market for just an edible lounge, but they could do that today. And then, as Andrew said, we haven't updated our ordinance. Revisiting that consumption conflict, if you will, is something that we'll have to reconcile it if and when we ever update the ordinance again.
All right, Willie?
If I heard you correctly, you're not permissible in the downtown core. Is that correct?
Right.
And then is there further discussion on that now, or is that just the way it's staying?
We have several council members that would like to bring it forward to allow it downtown. Now that we've opened up the market in Santa Rosa, and they have more lived experience with the industry and essentially how successful and quiet it could be. They are open to allowing it into the downtown, but not so much as to put some resources to it and update the ordinance to allow it. But that's going to be first on the list of consideration.
You'll still be able to use it at your home, Willie, so you're okay. Eric?
I've had a lot of experience in the last 2.5 years on Yolanda and Colden, working with Andrew Triple and Eric Forstall, and there's a whole industry of professionals that are helping out city staff, helping out landlords, and helping out cannabis people. And the city of Santa Rosa has, I think, encouraged that. There's a tremendous, very good group of both staff led by Andy Triple that help make things go smoothly, and outside professionals, architects, attorneys, engineers that understand it. We don't really have that here in Healdsburg at this stage, so it would be brought both on experienced staff and local professionals. But the other thing that keep in mind is that if I understand it right, cannabis is considered a change of use in most circumstances, which means upgrading ADA, bringing buildings, upgrading ADA, fire sprinklers, access, seismic, all sorts of things that can easily get into the $50 a square foot range for a landlord on an older building. And that's just that's both good news and bad news. I think it's really helped the city of Santa Rosa upgrade its industrial building stock.
Yes, there's been tremendous investment in our industrial stock. And I saw some earlier comments about the prices escalating. We couldn't give our industrial land away before all this happened, but I think there was other factors as well. Just industry was coming back and prices were going up. But yes, exponentially cannabis came in and they were willing to pay for all the improvements. So people, whether it was a lease agreement or they purchased it outright, they poured a bunch of money into upgrading the buildings. So we have discussed that even if the whole market dropped out, you know, it's been a huge boost to Santa Rosa's industrial stock to have the industry come in and renovate all these what were, you know, real old and dilapidated warehousing. And these improvements can benefit any of the industries that Santa Rosa supports, you know, food and beverage, craft industries that now they're all set up for flexibility. So that has been a great benefit.
Okay, Talia?
Just curious how much sales tax revenue has been generated since the ordinance was put into place, and maybe what percentage of your overall operating budget or revenue has that been?
I think Andrew might have those statistics. One thing I forgot to mention, when we adopted the comprehensive ordinance, by then we had 1.5 years of experience of how time intensive this was on staff across the organization. It was definitely not just planning, it was across. And so part of that comprehensive ordinance came with, I think, an ask of 12 positions citywide. And that was estimated in terms of meeting the need, but also that it could be paid for by our projections in terms of tax collection and permit and inspection fees. And so we made some matches there over experience, and then we missed some. So it hasn't been as lucrative as I think people imagine, but I do believe it did. It has covered the positions that we did add, but nothing more.
You know,
Like literally nothing more.
That's interesting. 12 positions for 22 applications. Am I reading that right?
No, it's across all of our applications. Remember, we allow from cultivation, manufacturing, distribution. So
and
the entire program.
Right, and that's also across economic development, code enforcement, planning,
fire,
fire,
police, I think. So there was a position across the organizations to support the effort.
And I don't know, I didn't hear where you got to Tally's question about revenue. Were you able to answer that?
Sure. So the revenue in 2018 was about 500,000. So that was our first year stepping out. And then our most recent year revenue was just over 2 million for the program as a whole. So of course that's going to include revenue from retail operations, which is the one that is taxed at 3%, and then manufacturing taxed at the lower rate. I can't break that out by land use type. That was just what I was able to get from finance today. So,
and you saw that we only tax certain elements.
Right.
We tax manufacturing, we tax cultivation, which we have very little of, but we have a lot of manufacturing, and then we have I forgot what you said, 8 operating dispensaries. So that's your relevancy, and that 2 million does cover the 12 positions that we hired with it.
And on one of the screens, I saw that you can tax up to 8%.
Yeah, so we do have with the measure that passed, we set a ceiling, and we can locally, without going back to the voters, implement raises of those, and for example, we can start to tax distribution, because we do have a ceiling on that as well, even though initially we have started off with a 0% tax. So we just need council support to do that. And interesting enough, we are in need of revenue, but there is some mixed feelings about raising the cannabis tax. So that's on the table though for this year. I think it needs to be discussed.
Okay, Skylar?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Skylar, Healdsburg City Council member. I'm wondering, you spoke about no on-site consumption, or I guess smoking, but edibles are fine. But I'm wondering how that applies to, I forget the name of the event, but the event that happens at the fairgrounds. Do they have to go through a special permitting process, or what did they have to do in order to do that event?
Must be the Emerald.
Right, that's a great question. I think that we've permitted several events at the fairgrounds. Of course, the largest one is the Emerald Cup, which I did read yesterday morning, I believe, in the Press Democrat is moving to Southern California. That's very unfortunate because it's been a hugely successful event. And then High Times is another one that's also been very successful at the fairgrounds. So we do, of course, the fairgrounds is county property within the City of Santa Rosa jurisdiction. And we look at events at the fairgrounds based upon who is bringing that event forward. So if the private sector is bringing an event such as Emerald Cup or High Times forward, then we do require a special event permit or temporary use permit for a special event. And we process that. What we do in those instances is we do require for them to identify an on-site consumption area that does comply with our smoking ordinance. So oftentimes what they'll do is have an area that's fenced and located at least 25 feet from any of the buildings on the site. They'll fence it typically with 8 feet tall of chain link fence that's then further concealed, with some sort of fabric material. what that does two things, actually. First of all, it ensures compliance with our smoking ordinance, but then it also ensures compliance with state law, which does not allow public consumption within view of the public. So they do have to screen that consumption area to comply with state law as well. So we've not had any issues gaining compliance with local ordinance or state ordinance. And I do know that from visiting those special events to see how they are functioning, that the state is very present at those special events to ensure compliance with state law as well. So I think it's worked very well. And then of course, we haven't had any activity over the past 15 months or so due to COVID, but it's I think it's worked out well for the event organizers as well as for the fairgrounds and for the city.
Okay, I think we have time for, well, we really don't have time, but we'll take time for one more question. I want to make sure, Jeff, do you have anything that you want to bring up? Because we didn't get a chance to talk to Jeff Kays, our city manager.
I'm happy to allow for more questions if you want to go that route. And then if there's time, we could, myself or a council member could provide a quick update. Okay,
cool. All right. I think the only one left I have is Erin Gore.
Yeah, hi. I was just hoping, Claire, maybe you guys could comment on the, as a cannabis operator, one of the headaches we have is the NIMBY community and the SOS community. If you follow county politics at all, there's a lot of myths and non-truths, and there's a lot of fear-mongering around cannabis. So I was hoping maybe you could just comment on how that impacted you, or what amount of that you saw and how you handled it.
Well, from a policy preparation standpoint, they had all those fears before we even opened up our first shop. So they didn't have real lived experience fears. They had what they were anticipating. So not unlike other land uses, really. So we just collected those fears and tried to figure out how are they addressed in the process. So that's where we locked in on odor as a #1 fix, security as a second, and then lighting and noise because of the generators and the all the nuisance factors. So basically that's what they were concerned with, is the nuisance factors. And so we factored that into upfront, but and then honestly, it's trying to get people, residents, other businesses, politicians, all of them out to tour legal cannabis operations. Now, when we started so early, we toured illegal operations. I had to sign non-disclosure agreements because I needed to know what it's like, right? Because I needed to know what the operational impacts would be like. And so I went out and toured, and I secured tours for others that would be involved in preparing the policy. And then as we started to get legal operators up and running, whether it was in other jurisdictions, we toured all those facilities. That's pretty fun to do, but also it's highly telling what the true impacts are. So you can document those experiences, and then that way you're speaking from an informed standpoint when you're talking with residents.
All right, well, I'd like to, we're through with time. I've got a couple of things I got to do too. And we want to really thank you, Claire, and you, Andrew, for all the time you've spent with us, which has been wonderful, very informative. Anybody else have any comments in the area? Or Talia, rather?
I'd like to allow for David or Jeff to do just a quick report, because I have been chatting with them.
Yeah, so Andrew and
thank you so much.
We want to thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and presentation.
Great. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So maybe City Council.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. I've got two things I want to share. Our next council meeting is on Monday. We're going to be getting our third quarter financial update, which will include updates on TOT and different things like that. So it really ties into certain segments of this conversation we had here. And then the other item that got pushed from our last meeting is the reestablishment of late fees, utility disconnects, and offering past due payment plans. The city's been very proactive in working with people during COVID. But we have about almost $600,000 in outstanding balances A lot of those are small amounts, so the city will be working with people, but it's something that will be on our discussion for Monday's agenda. And then I'll turn it over to Jeff, who I think wanted to touch on the drought real quick.
Sure, thank you. And I know we're late, I'll be really quick. Drought is kind of our focus right now. We really need everybody's help. It's as severe as it sounds like it is. I think there's a very good chance we will be recommending increased conservation soon. We have a notice from the State Water Board of curtailment of our water rights out of the Russian River, which is 80% of our water. So it's bad. It's likely to get worse. We really need everybody on board. We quite frankly have not succeeded yet in our messaging from the city side. This is a business group, so I'll acknowledge that 70-ish% of our water use is from residences, but we really do need everybody on board and everybody kind of singing the same tune. So I would just ask all of you to be partners with us as we try to get the word out, and just even little things that seem very symbolic are A, helpful in the aggregate, and B, are helpful in just trying to get those messages out. So be prepared for more and worse on that. We're exploring actively ways to use recycled water more, getting it to residents, getting it to our city facilities. The costs are pretty severe for that because it really requires trucking all day. There's wear and tear on the road. So we're trying to figure that out, but it's really just a very small piece of the pie. Long term, I'm hoping this is the year that we can get some big funding in the millions for Purple Pipe, which gets recycled water into town. We need something in the order of $10 to $15 million to do that. So I don't think we have that lying around. But there is a lot of infrastructure money out there this year. So, we're trying to think short term and long term, but really everything that everybody can do to help us with this. You all know better than I, there can be some of this residents versus tourist dynamic. And my hope is that we can just all be on the same team on this thing and trying to share in the burden. So that's really the big one. Just two very, very quick updates beyond that. I recommend keeping an eye on the Planning Commission. If you're interested in new business and development activity, there's a lot going on. The Planning Commission approved the design review a couple of weeks ago for the North Village project with some recommended changes, but nothing super significant. So that project is moving forward. They'll also be looking at a new restaurant proposal just north of on the plaza, essentially next to Duke's, at their meeting next week. So lots of you are curious about that stuff. I definitely recommend you don't have to spend 3 hours at the meeting, but have a look at the agendas when they come out, because there's a lot going on. So I'll stop there due to time, but help us with the drought, please.
Hey, Jeff, so have you got any kind of feedback yet on how the curtailment is working? The restrictions you put on use for, say, outside watering and.
Yeah, it's not. We were in the first few weeks we were up in water use, and it's hard to look at different years. We actually look back 5 years because how hot the spring is matters and how dry the winter is matters. But people are irrigating a lot. We've finally gotten into the negative where we're saving something. We're nowhere close to the 20% we need. I walk around all the time. There's a lot of really beautiful lawns in this town, and that's great. But this is probably not the year to be winning awards for lawns. So honestly, we haven't been very successful yet. So we continue to talk about new approaches. All good ideas are welcome. We're going to be trying different things going forward. We want more carrots than sticks. But all good ideas are welcome. It isn't clicking yet.
Yeah, and I think it just takes time for some people to get the whole, set up for their recycling on water, if they even know how to do it, that type of thing. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. We took a lot more time on the cannabis project than we anticipated from our angle, from Talia and I, but so we'll spend more time with you guys next time. We won't be having one in July, but we will in August. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And again, thanks for the great participation. Talia and Jessica, thank you for everything you do putting this together. Talia, any closing remarks?
My only remark is to remind people, if you have topics of interest, we are getting a schedule together for the coming 6 months and hopefully into next year. So please let us know if you have ideas or speakers for us to consider. But thank you everyone for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Yep. Get out there, conserve water, and have fun. See you guys.